Hi everyone, and welcome to the next episode of our Community Spotlight series. For this episode, I had the pleasure of talking to Dr. Ray, an Associate Professor of Musicology at the College of Music at Michigan State University. Dr. Ray has been the recipient of several awards and grants from MSU for her dedication to students and large efforts to provide a more inclusive curriculum to her students. To check out more of what Dr. Ray has done, check the description for a link to her full bio. Dr. Ray and I had a great conversation focusing on how the pandemic has impacted teachers, students, academia, and ways we can move forward into post-virtual teaching. To view sections of the conversation, check out the timestamps in the description. All that being said, please welcome Dr. Ray. So, with the pandemic overall, there's a ton of different viewpoints, a ton of different lenses, and so from my perspective, and people I'm around, I've heard a ton of different students talk about their experiences with the pandemic and everything. But I'd really like to just hear from you, from the side of a faculty member and a professor. What was that first month like of all those changes back in March 2020? Broad question to start, but.
Yeah, fortunately, my husband and I had already, we were checking the news and we were really already kind of cognizant of what could happen. And so the day actually that President Stanley was like, we're going to go online starting the next day or on Friday or whatever, I had actually planned to come to my classes that day with okay, this is how we're going to do it if we go virtual. I came to class ready to say that before he even announced what we were going to do. So
Wow.
yeah, so it was great because I had already had a very small experience with Zoom. And so I knew that if we went virtual, that would be the platform that I'd want to use. And so that's what I told students before they even got the email that we were going to go virtual. So I felt like that was really good because it was like they knew I had a plan and that I was ready to enact it right away. It also really helped that just taking a history class and putting it online is super easy. I just didn't really change that much. I was hoping that students would continue to want to discuss things. I could show videos, I could play music, it was easy. So Friday was just what we'd been doing, but on Zoom. So I felt really lucky in that way that it didn't require new technology. It didn't require me to learn a new skill. I didn't really have to do anything. And so that was really great. The problem, of course, which, as you know, having taken a class with me, that being in my home, it was like we had two preschoolers at home. So we were balancing two full-time jobs and parenting full-time. So I would say personally, it was much more of a challenge than it was professionally. Professionally, it was like, I'll just carry on. Personally, it was way more to juggle. So I had so much less time. Just I had 3.5 hours a day to work, and then the rest of the time was parenting so that my husband could work. So I don't know. I found that to be challenging, but it was also great because we were outside more. It was like, what are we going to do with the kids? Well, let's put them in the backyard. And so it was actually wonderful to not only reconnect with our children, spend lots of time with them, but be outside and enjoy the beautiful weather. And yeah, it was very restorative in a way. So as anxious as we were and as much doom scrolling as we all did, suddenly work-life balance was a requirement. So there was good and bad, but I would say the transition was really easy. I didn't like the fact that, now that we were all at home, there was an assumption that I'd always be available for a Zoom meeting.
Oh.
I didn't really love that because, but I did it anyway. I did all the Zoom meetings, every Zoom meeting, but I would often have a preschooler climbing on me or whatever. And I was like, welcome to my house. Welcome to my world. So, and it was, because so many of the students, like we had had 6 weeks of class before everything started, everyone had kind of developed a rapport. So the discussions just kind of continued. And that was really great. It was much harder in the fall to develop rapport electronically, virtually, than it was in the spring. So the spring, and everyone felt like it was temporary, right? The messaging was, this will be a few weeks, right? And so we just all felt like it was this temporary challenge that we were going to overcome in a matter of time, in a matter of weeks or months or something. By fall, it was harder. Like the students were already starting to feel like, okay, this is a challenge to stay motivated. It's a challenge to stay invested. I can't hold difficult material right now because too much of my own personal life is difficult, that sort of thing. So I felt like it was much, much harder fall. And then by spring, it was just like it was so, like, motivation was practically non-existent for a lot of students. And, students are telling me now that I'm meeting for the first time, like you, in person. They're like, I'm a really good student. I just struggled last year. And I'm like, I never thought you were not a good student. Like, there was no judgment.
Going to like personal life and professional boundaries and being expected to do Zoom meetings all the time. Um, how is that translated to now, coming from digital to now? That kind of, we were used to driving everywhere in that time, and then digitally it was just instant, and now it's back. Have you noticed like some like hard to like go back into gear of where we were, I guess?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I find myself even now saying, "Oh, well, I can't meet you." Like, if you can't meet during my office hours, I'm in my office just a short window every day because, again, I'm still parenting one of our children. And so then I will say, "But I can Zoom you during that time or whatever." So like I've just kind of accepted it as a part of how we're gonna do this thing that we're doing right now. Um, but I think being back in person, there are more boundaries. Like, people don't want to show up to in-person meetings. I think in part just to protect their own health or the health of their family. But we're all just, like, the last 2 weeks of being back in person, that transition was way harder than transitioning to online. Like, being back in person has just been so exhausting, that nobody's like, let's have a meeting. You know what I mean? Like, everybody's like, I'm gonna go to sleep or whatever. So that's been good, actually, because it has cleared up a little bit more space where I'm not trying to juggle too many things at once. I think I think people really are overwhelmed by being back, and so um,
All of I'm really interested from the teaching side of things, collegiately, how when this all happened in spring last year, how did you find a balance between acknowledging these like world changes that are happening, but also just not hyper fixating on them?
yes. So what I did was we sort of carried on in terms of the material. What I figured at the time was just like having an anchor, having like an expectation, like this is what we're going to do because that's what's on the syllabus, as being a way to hold continuity, right? That
Mm.
like routine is really helpful for all of us, but it's especially helpful in stressful times. So we did do that. So we just kind of stuck to it. But at the same time, like there were many world changing events, and people wanted to, well, there was a split, I would say. There were some people who wanted to take the historical things we were looking at and talk about how they mattered today. And I always, like, for me, whatever I have on the syllabus is really just like a guide, like maybe we'll talk about that or maybe we won't. Because I want what we do to be relevant and meaningful. And I can't decide that. The students decide what's relevant and meaningful to them. So I'm always happy, as you know, to go rabbit hole. But there were people, I think, that wanted to stick to straight up history. Like they wanted to stick to that, um, because that feels stable, it feels fixed, it feels comfortable to some degree, rather than this rapidly changing world we were living in. And at the same time, all of a sudden we were really isolated. And I think people wanted to talk about those things because they didn't have their people, right? Class was a space where you could talk about things and get other perspectives. And so, I mean, as I always do in class, I sort of, whoever is willing to take a leap in class and take us a direction, I'm willing to go there. If people don't take a leap, then I don't know that there's something else there. So that was tricky because I didn't really know that some people were just like, let's do history or whatever, because they didn't tell me. But other than that, I also really foregrounded a lot of like mental health stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
like utilizing the chat, I would say that was one of the most useful tools, and one that I don't miss a lot about online teaching, but I did like the chat. People were validating each other in ways that they don't do in the classroom, that I think that's to all of our benefit when we can at least like really celebrate the smart things that people say. But I also used it to do like informal polls, like what are you doing? What's your favorite song to relax to? Or what song do you listen to when you're feeling stressed out? Or where do you go to be around nature to balance out all this screen time or whatever? So I usually started class with that and had people put it in the chat, just to remind people that that was important, that they should be thinking about their mental health, that I valued their mental health, and that I was going to do whatever I could to be compassionate around that. Um, yeah, I felt like it was important to be really mindful that people were really stressed out, because I didn't want to, like, I thought about it a lot, and I may have brought it up in the class, that I didn't want to be part of the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like if people are really stressed out, I didn't want like what we were doing in class to be adding to that. And I just wanted to like figure out, am I helping by providing routine? Am I not helping because I have too high expectations? I don't know. So I did try to make space for that conversation in classes.
Yeah, I'll say from the student perspective, and from quite literally from your class, it's digitally, it's not anything I would ever wish to like be like taught in that format, but it's not ironic, but it's just like it's interesting that like in that format, that was probably the most humanized I felt with my fellow classmates, by just
Mm,
doing like a chat function like that. Because
yes.
even as students, like, and we all see it in classroom settings, the even in person, like, and we can see especially now the fear still to talk to others and reach out to others. But digitally, like through that text means, people were willing to do it, and I saw it
Yes.
happen a lot. Yeah. Um, and so that was definitely a positive that I, yeah. And thank you for doing that, I should say. Um,
Well, it's just it was such a wonderful tool.
yeah.
I really thought it was great. And I also noticed what was also interesting about being virtual is that we were in our comfortable, well, not everybody was. I acknowledge that certain people were living in very dangerous situations. But for those students who are living in comfortable situations, in their own space, in their bed, in their pajamas, not wearing shoes, whatever it was that made them feel comfortable, I found that some students actually flourished
Mm,
online. Like that students who may not have talked in my class at other times were talking. They were contributing because they felt comfortable. I think there are lots of complexities there that I understand, but I did notice that some people just felt more comfortable. And we talked about it in some of my classes. So, like in my doctoral class, we talked about it a little bit, that like just the institutional space is very brutal. It's white walls and it's very square, and like the chairs are really small and uncomfortable, right? That like it doesn't it just leads to a very, we may have talked about this in the Brook class, like how venues shape how we behave, how we move, how we think, how we talk. That these academic spaces do that to people, and maybe they don't want to do that. They want to have like intimate or freewheeling conversations, but like the space makes them feel like I can't do that.
And that, I mean, it's definitely important to, I think it's, for at least my mind, it's really dangerous that you can look at all the factors and notice like a positive change like that from like, oh, it is from digital, or like it's for like from that, but it's a multitude of factors like you were talking about. I mean, people being comfortability of their home, maybe they got more rest and sleep because of like less travel time, or just like I, whatever it may be, comfortability of clothing and stuff, and like um, so I think it's important to learn from that,
Yes.
and a goal for all of us for higher ed, and I mean just education in general would be to take some of those factors moving
Hmm.
forward, because the goal is to increase discussion and to increase learning, um,
Right.
and we can do that with less white walls, like I mean you talked about, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, like the doctoral class that I just talked about this with, they were like, if the weather's good and you don't have any musical examples to play, can we have class outside? I was like,
That's
absolutely.
awesome. Yeah.
So, we're totally doing that tomorrow and Friday, I think. So, you know, yeah, I mean, I like that. So I like that these are conversations we're having because of this opportunity to shift what we do and think about it in new ways.
Mhm.
I think that's really important. And just to acknowledge, our shared fragile humanity, right? Like if we start there, then we're liable to open up these kinds of conversations. Like, what do we need to do different so that there's greater access here, which we weren't doing because we didn't think to ask because we were just like, this is how we do it, and so we're just going to keep doing it this way.
Yeah, if anything, I mean, I'm just gonna say a bunch of buzzwords and phrases like right in a row, but if anything, this last year and a half, it's just shown us, it's raised more like questions and awareness than anything, and it's kind of raised the bar, for everyone, um,
Mm-hmm.
moving forward. I mean, with social issues and political, and but especially just humanity, like you mentioned, uh, and we certainly like don't want to be thankful that a tragedy like has happened this last year has happened, but um, it has shown us a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean the most important thing is like what can we learn from it, right? Instead of like, and now we'll just go back to the way things were because that was working beautifully. Like you said, like we have exposed many problems that we don't want to just like I think about like I'm thinking a lot right now and talking about it in some of my classes. There's this notion of restorative justice and then there's transformative justice. And restoring is like going back to the way things were. But when you're talking about, I don't know, like many important political issues, restoring isn't going to take us anywhere. Like it's going to take us back to a bad place. So what we need to do is really transform into doing something new. And I think that's what we have the possibility to do is really transform and say, I acknowledge that we have taken the veil off of problems that we were ignoring because we could, because it was easy, because it benefited us. And now that we've seen them, maybe instead of just trying to get back to the way things were, let's do it differently. Let's and acknowledging the constraints, right? It's still an institution. It's built the way it's built. There are structures in place that are hard for individuals to tear down. Like I redid the Baroque class because I wanted to acknowledge a lot of things, but one class can't like change the world. It can't change the discipline. It can't change people's lives. Like it can't really do that. So just balancing like things need to change, but it's not all my responsibility is kind of what
It's
kind
certainly
of
a step forward, like for
yes,
sure.
right.
Yes.
Like how can we do that without taking on all the responsibility for all like changing an institution is my current my current battle.
Just to kind of call back and tie together like what you were saying, it's kind of like the same idea you were saying of like it's different for a class, like that it's appropriate of like a response of someone wanting normalcy versus maybe
Mhm.
acknowledging changes happening, and then the class as a student, like both of those are justified, but some of these problems that we're facing now, I'm seeing those two kind of polarized views of people wanting to appeal to like and go back to restorative as you were talking about and a sense of normalcy
Mm-hmm.
versus like challenging some of those thoughts. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting.
Yeah, and we get it in classes too. I mean, we always have that kind of tension between, right now I'm trying to redo the undergraduate music history survey, right? And I'm sure you've taken that, right? And it sort of marches through time. It's very composer centric. It's not diverse in any way. And how do we acknowledge that like that doesn't work anymore? Like we can't do it the old way. Like that erases so much of not only like the histories, like really important histories, but it doesn't acknowledge the student body that we have like at all. So yeah, so I mean there's so much that needs to be changed, and I'm hopeful that we actually gained a lot of momentum. People were at home and all they were doing was doom scrolling, right? So like we had this opportunity to go, you know what, I need to rethink what I'm doing based on what's happening in the world. And I think there was momentum to do
Hmm.
that because people were listening. They weren't just like, oh, yeah, I don't have time to listen to that. I got to drive to work and I got to go do the things that I always do or whatever. We were listening for the first time because it was our connection to the world.
I was looking down and it's funny because we kind of just like strolled right into my second question, but to like focus in this idea of restructuring, and I wrote it down, the idea of reflection, because that's kind of something I felt personally, and also just from those around me, of like it's been a year and a half of reflecting on the past and the year itself, and a lot of meta conversations. Um, it can become a lot when you're just doing it
Yes.
for such a long period of time. Uh, so we could talk about that if you want. Or I wrote down specifically um, what you've seen within music curriculums or music academia, what the type of reflection that took place in the last year. So either one of those roads.
Yeah. I mean, certainly in response to like the murder of George Floyd and the protest 2020, there was finally like momentum to change the music history survey, which of course I'm responsible for, and in the fall. So they were like, well, in 6 weeks' time, we want you to revolutionize this course. And I was like, okay.
Okay.
I mean, it desperately needed to be done, right? Like it was like well overdue. So I was happy to do it. I had so much less time. So that was great. I mean, that was just like we needed to burn that down. We can't really burn it down because again, institutional rules. Like it's called History of Western Music to 1750. Um, so so there it's still limited, right? Like that we are in a long-term process of change. But I did notice there was a lot of momentum to change. We were like, this just won't do anymore. This is not acceptable. I feel very uncomfortable with like going down with this burning ship of like prioritizing certain kinds of music over others, and so that was great. I mean, that was great to see across the board that it wasn't just my own personal feeling because that was a crusade I'd been on for so long, but it was nice to see other people get on board with that, not only like in the field at large, but in our institution at MSU. It was
Mhm.
really nice to see like a lot of work going into that, rethinking curriculums. But I this feels like a really process because you can't undo something that's been done the same way for so long in a short amount of time. Like it has to be done carefully, mindfully, and things change. Like I taught that class, it went fine, but now that we're back in person, I realize they're like people have carried so much trauma over the last 18 months that some of those conversations they just cannot have. They just cannot have them. They just got no space. They've been doing all this reflecting, all this soul searching, all this, thinking about just like existential despair. You know what I mean? That
Mhm.
like they just can't hold it. And so now I'm realizing, okay, the things that I had planned for the semester, I just don't think all of them are going to work. And I need to be flexible and change them. And I think that's just respecting where people are. music students in particular of of groups in a university setting are highly prone to anxiety and depression, right? And it's astounding that we don't have that conversation because it is very much baked into the structure of a college of music. So that I have to tell my students, like, this is a music history class and there's no first chair here. Like, you're not fighting for this one premier position. Just enjoy the flexibility that this class allows you, not having to compete for a second, right? And that there's this expectation that you already know everything by the time you get into the college, right? That you've had years of training or whatever. And so then people apologize, well, I don't really know this subject matter. And I'm like, that's why there's this class, right? Like, it's okay not to know stuff. Um, but also I think it combines with other things that are happening outside of the classroom, which is if you don't know something and you say something ignorant, someone could take you down on social media after class. And so there's a real fear there of saying the wrong thing and of learning. And so much of learning is making mistakes, but we're so afraid of it because we're also policed by social media. So I'm very surprised that we don't have those conversations, that especially now. I mean, if you're interacting with students right now, you know they are struggling. If you interacted with them at all last year, you knew they were struggling. And I mean, the truth is, I was asked to give a trauma informed pedagogy talk to our faculty that never happened. And now they're
Wow.
like sending us emails saying, please use a trauma informed approach. And I'm like, well, good luck. None of you know what it is necessarily. Like, I find that I find that too bad because there are people in the College of Music that actually have that expertise, and we really need it all over in every aspect of the college. We need that.
I mean, that's kind of. I'm just saying, repeating what you're saying almost, but that's kind of the source of it all is that it's taboo subject and it's not talked about at all, and it's really quite interesting where um, we can fixate on that the subject matter needs to be so pure and like really be the right thing. But sometimes, and what I've noticed is just giving a platform or space for those to talk about whatever they're
Yes.
dealing with, just that in of itself, like, is the answer for them and others in the room. And it creates this like pinball effect. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, just to acknowledge that you're not alone in your suffering. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, like I've been really challenged by this idea that, like, you know what, this syllabus I had planned, like there are just many aspects that aren't going to work, and just asking myself, well, how am I going to change it? And I felt really alone in that, like, that somehow I have to do it all and I'm responsible for everything. And then a former student who's now teaching sent me an email that was very similar. Like, my students are making a lot of demands and I don't know how to navigate this course in a way that meets their needs and meets mine. And I was like, oh, yeah, right? Like, that's what I'm feeling. And his situation is very different, but at least I felt like just acknowledge that other people are thinking about it. And if we could do that with students, that the competition is hard, this idea. I mean, I think it was the Baroque class where a student mentioned that there was this wildly unrealistic expectation that in lessons, if they were happening via recording, that you were going to record it multiple times so you could get a perfect version, which was like, never, it wouldn't happen if you're in person, right? You would just play what you played and it would be good or it'd be not so good, and that's just what happened. And then there, all of a sudden, there are even higher expectations. We didn't even talk about like how the pandemic changed us in ways that are more traumatizing. And that needs to be said.
I mean, just as people, but like as musicians, like you said, just like through, I mean, just the realm of recording itself for competitions or lessons or anything like that. I mean, that's something that all of us, I think, in the College of Music at MSU have kind of carried the last year and a half. And even if a professor didn't necessarily say it, there was kind of an expectation to, like, technical facility, the standard like changed. But
Yes.
that doesn't and will not necessarily mean like the rise of the product, or like whatever, if you want to call it a product, the rise of it will increase. In fact, like certain element, like whatever someone would may want to call it, the vibe of it, the I mean just the overall feeling of it, the musicality and the artistry, that was forever changed during it, and I think still something as musicians we're trying to grab back. Yeah.
Yeah, or just the expectation, like we had wildly unrealistic goals. We were really going to clean our house. We were going to potty train our 2-year-old. We were going to teach the 4-year-old to read. None of that happened. Like we're still working on all of those things. But there was this idea, well, now you've got all this time. And so rather than saying, maybe take care of your mental health, it was like, do more things, do them better. Like that mindset was there already, right? And was already a problem. And we made it worse during a terrible time. And I just worry a little bit that that remains, right? Like, what are the expectations for our students? Are they high or higher than they were even pre pandemic? Are we cognizant that they're not capable? Giving them, just being compassionate and being like, yeah, you're a human and this is hard. And can we just like human together and acknowledge challenging and try to help one another? That'd be awesome.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess that moves into some more questions I have about like moving forward, is
Mm-hmm.
that uh and I'm putting you on the spot a little because I'm still figuring it out, but how do you think, as specifically musicians, um how can we create these types of spaces, I guess, and moments for each other to be able to not necessarily share, like, sometimes there isn't the space to share like all of, this pent up like month or year and a half trauma, but what are some situations and like things that we can do for our colleagues that you see?
Yeah, well, I mean, as you know Christine Beamer, like she did have a workshop last week
Mm-hmm.
on resilience building. So I was a part of that because I'm like, I love talking about mental health. Let's talk about mental health all day. And it was great. We had like a panel of faculty. We had some students come. They asked questions. We talked about like what our resilience building skills are, what we use, where we are terrible and still learning, and just like making that really transparent so that students, I mean, it's nobody idolizes music history professors, but they do sort of idolize their applied professors, right? And think they're perfect and they've always been good or whatever. So like just hearing some of those people talk struggles and how they overcome them, and I think is a really important conversation we need to have. Just to remind students that we are people, um, and make like destigmatize it in every realm, right? So if I talk about it in my classes, even if it's just like talk to your neighbor and ask them what relaxing thing they're looking forward to this weekend, it's just saying it's a priority. I all, especially my grad students, like I'm going to hold you account, like my grad students especially, like the ones that are music historians. I'm like, you need to text me on Sunday and tell me that you're not working. You need to tell me that you're watching a movie. Like I've had many students that I had to do that with because I did not trust them to take time off.
That's very
Um,
wholesome.
I
I like that.
because I was a grad student too, and I remember thinking, and I was told by the faculty essentially that like if you're not reading or you're not writing or you're not thinking, then you are not doing your job, and it's not what we're paying you for. This tiny little stipend that you're supposed to live on, like somehow that's supposed to like make a 90-hour week or whatever. And I lived with that mindset for decades. And that is not healthy, right? So acknowledging that and saying, I don't know, critiquing capitalism or whatever, and just saying like you are more than what you produce. And that's not the official party line, in colleges, because the typical messaging is you need to be practicing more, you need to be working harder, you need to be better than the person sitting next to you. Um, and that's the goal. But the way of getting there, I think, is being kinder to ourselves.
I really like that overall, just I guess, sentiment of like the small gestural of asking your neighbor like what relaxing thing they're doing or things like that. Because I know for my mindset, a lot of it went to like extremes of like, um, I mean, just you can't full on have like those types of conversation like things like that
Yes.
with others and like completely all like it just doesn't work like that. Also for yourself, it's kind of like in my dabblings with yoga too, it's like you just like want to like go into the hardest pose or whatever, and that didn't go well for me. Um, but
Yeah.
sometimes you just do a child's pose, you know, and it's just
Right.
like, yeah.
Yes. I mean, this is something that I've told students. I'm like, resilience building or starting these conversations is something that has to be every day, right? Because you don't want to be like, I'm so stressed out. Now I'm going to try yoga. Like a terrible time to like try to do something hard. You're going to mess up and you're going to feel worse. And maybe now like
Yeah.
in physical pain, right? So it has to be a sustainable practice, and it has to like you're building a skill, and that those kind of social ties we're rebuilding right now. So all of my classes begin with introduce yourself to your neighbor if you don't know them, ask them how their weekend was, ask them what their favorite song is, or whatever, just to start a conversation. And that actually is crucial at any time, because if we are going to have serious conversations, we want to trust the people we're in a room with.
Yes.
So but also networking happens. Maybe you get a date. I don't know. There are lots of reasons to be in a classroom that don't have to do with what I'm trying to teach you. So acknowledging that, I think, is important.
Mm-hmm.
Feeling vibes in a room. Like I teach a lot of really difficult, sensitive material. So feeling a vibe in a room is really important. Because if something shifts, like sometimes I could read it, but only if your camera's on. And not everybody's camera's on. And certainly you can't hear people sighing or whatever because they're all muted. So that was hard to really, I didn't know if people were just like stewing in their houses, like really angry, and I also didn't like trying to tell a joke and like it meaning total silence. That wasn't great either. But it did give me a chance to hone a skill that I've been working on that's hard now that we're back in person, which is to listen more.
Mm.
Be a little bit more comfortable with silence after I ask a question. I'm really not good at that. Silence makes me fearful. So I'm like, but to just try to give people more space, because there are, lots of students just need more time, because we give visibility and authority to the students who can answer first. And I wanted to make more space. So my trick was to take a drink of coffee or tea or whatever, but can't do it now. Like you take down your mask and everyone, it's like horror. So
Yeah.
like so the skill that I was like trying to develop in a way that made me feel less awkward, rather than just like waiting for a response and staring at the students, I'll just casually take a sip of coffee, was helpful to practice a skill that I wanted to develop. The thing too that I think really changed is the intimacy of having people in your home.
Mm.
It just changes how you are with people, which is, I think, why some people felt more comfortable. But I just couldn't ignore the fact that, like, yeah, my dog's barking, my kids are screaming, my husband's singing karaoke upstairs, the fire alarm went off one time and I had to carry my computer
Oh my
outside.
gosh.
Yeah, because my husband was cooking something and there was a lot of smoke or whatever. And in some ways, I think that was great. I've always been sort of, before the pandemic, I was like not. I would sometimes give anecdotes, but really kind of walled off in terms of my personal life. And so I think it was humanizing,
Mm.
that people could just we it was more real in some ways, and maybe some people were uncomfortable with that. I don't know, but in some ways, I think that made it a little less strict and formal, which is good, which can grant some people more access.
For sure. I was gonna ask because you mentioned, I forgot about this, but I've always wondered from a professor perspective, POV, uh, being in as like, I mean, just the irony of it, of like everyone's cameras being off and everyone mute, or someone does say like a professor says a joke and there being silence, like that in of itself, like the fact there is no vibe, like that has to create some kind of vibe for you then as a professor.
Yes, I
Hmm.
found that to be so hard because certainly, like as a music historian in a college of music that's kind of a conservatory setting, a lot of people don't want to take history. They're already not into it. So I've always like worked really hard to like make it interesting and make it fun and here's a video and do all that. But then, like online, it was like this mountain to climb, to be like, and everybody's having fun and how's your mental health and how's mine? Who knows? Like it just felt like this incredible thing that I was trying to take on. And admittedly, I always take on more responsibility for things than is strictly necessary. But I very much felt like I need to hang this together. I'm responsible about whether they stay motivated, I'm responsible about whether they learn anything. And um, so that was really big. It was just so exhausting to keep that energy when there's nothing coming back.
It sounds like it. I mean, it's kind of what you're saying. It sounds like you're carrying a burden of almost 20 people, of black screens in a
Yes.
conference room.
Yeah. So it was a lot because I feed off of energy of students.
Hmm.
That so yeah, so like the enjoyment I get out of my job, the thing that like makes it fun, worthwhile, meaningful is like really good exchanges with people. And so that was diminished. I mean, it wasn't like not present because there were people in my classes who were awesome and really showed up and said interesting things and brought us all to a new level of knowledge. There were those people, and I can't tell you how much I appreciated them because that made my job easier. It made my life easier just to like have to do a little bit less work. But it was really exhausting.
Oh, I was also going to mention that um, it's funny in retrospect, but I know it wouldn't have been in the moment. But like with silence, of like being comfortable with silence, I found in some of my Zoom classes that it like went one of two ways, and maybe as with your classes you can speak to this, but it was like students got uncomfortable with like the added silence, so there would be increased responses, or students
Mhm.
like grew real like they were like grew comfortable with the silence, so that it would,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I was really, really lucky. In all of my classes, I had at least a handful of people who were really committed
Mm.
to like showing up, participating, building knowledge with me and their classmates, and that held it together. I didn't have, and I mean, sometimes like it's true, it's true in person as it is
That's true,
online,
yes, yep.
right? But like, I mean, yesterday when I started my seminar, I was like throwing stuff out there. I was like, what about this? What about that? And like nothing, like silence from my doctoral students. And I'm like, okay, we're not feeling chatty. All right, plan B. Like roll out the point or whatever. And that's fine. I've always acknowledged that there are just going to be days that people are too tired. They're not chatty, who knows what,
Hmm.
right? That there just needs to be a plan B so that if no one wants to talk, I have a PowerPoint, we can go through it. Boring to do that, but sometimes we need the structure or we need somebody else to carry the weight today. So I do that in person or online, but I prefer when people talk.
I mean, I'll say, like, from my own perspective, like in your class, like there were some days that I like very much appreciated that, where I just didn't feel like I had the space to be able to even conceive of thinking about like whatever it may be. But the thing I really appreciated about your class was that there were like that space was there, and then some days like we had like really really great back and forth conversations because it was there. So thank you
Mhm.
for doing that, by the way. And
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I think we want that, and I want that more often than not,
mhm,
but we have to go with what happens. You know, there was a time early in my career that, especially early on, that I was like, why is no one into this? And my sister, who is not an academic, was like, they're not you and they have other priorities. So maybe they didn't do the reading because they actually don't care. And I was like, what? And so it's just like important to acknowledge that just because it's important to me doesn't mean that it's other people's priorities. And that's okay. Like, I'm not going to get anywhere if I make everyone think that this has to be their priority. Like, I'll never invite them in with that kind of energy. I can invite them in if I make it interesting. Maybe I can't. But just the only way to reach students is actually to meet them where they are. And if where they are is not interested, let it be okay, you know?
mhm.